He said those words right before the flight began boarding, treating me like a backup option. But he forgot that every luxury door he is walking through opens with my name. I did not need to scream or stage a scene. I simply rose from my seat and left to withdraw everything I had given him, and soon, all three of them would be on their knees, brought down by their own greed. My name is Harper Lane, and at 37 years old, I stood at the precipice of a decision that would redefine the rest of my life, though I did not know it yet. The automatic doors of the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport slid open with a mechanical hiss, hitting me with a blast of recycled air that smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the unique anxiety of early morning travel. It was 5 a.m. The terminal hummed with the quiet desperation of travelers trying to outrun the sunrise, their shoes clicking against the polished linoleum in a rhythm that usually calmed me. I adjusted the strap of my leather tote bag on my shoulder. This trip to Aspen was supposed to be the solution. I had treated our failing marriage like a struggling subsidiary in my portfolio. I had audited our time together, restructured my entire calendar, and canceled 3 high-profile fundraising galas just to clear this week. I convinced myself that if I just applied enough pressure and resources, I could turn the red numbers black. I was playing the role of the perfect administrator, ensuring everything was ready for a romantic reconciliation that would erase the cold distance of the last 2 years. Then I saw him. Graham was standing near the priority check-in kiosks. He was laughing. It was a deep, chest-rumbling sound that I had not heard directed at me in a very long time. I stopped moving, letting the crowd of rolling suitcases flow around me like water around a stone. He was not alone. My mother-in-law, Diane Pierce, was there, fussing with the collar of her coat. And clinging to Graham's arm, with a familiarity that made my stomach turn over, was a young woman I recognized as Brielle Knox. She was leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder as if she belonged there. My eyes drifted down to the luggage beside them, and the air left my lungs. There it was, a champagne bronze carry-on with a pristine leather tag. My breath hitched. I had purchased that exact suitcase 4 days ago. It was supposed to be a surprise gift for Graham for this specific trip. I had hidden it in the back of my closet. Now, it was standing next to Brielle's snow boots, looking like it belonged to her. Graham looked up and locked eyes with me. I expected a flinch. I expected the sudden, jerky movement of a man caught in a lie. But there was nothing. No panic. No guilt. He just smiled that easy, charming smile that used to make my knees weak. He looked at me as if I were simply 10 minutes late to a casual lunch, not walking into a scene that was actively dismantling my life. "Finally," Diane said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the low murmur of the terminal. She looked me up and down with that signature disdain she usually reserved for waitstaff who brought her the wrong tea. "Try to look a little more alive. Harper, a wife sets the tone for the vacation. If you are sour, everyone suffers." Brielle shifted, tightening her grip on Graham's bicep. She offered me a small, tight smile. It was the kind of expression that pretended to be polite but screamed territorial dominance. "Hi, Harper," Brielle said, her voice sugary sweet. "I hope you don't mind. Graham said you wouldn't mind if I tagged along. I just love skiing, and it seemed silly to stay behind when you have that big cabin." I did not answer her. I could not. The audacity was so thick I could almost taste it. I looked at Graham. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a stack of passports. He thrust them toward me, not even breaking his posture. "You're here," Graham said, his tone breezy and authoritative. "Go get us checked in. I want to make sure Brielle and I are seated together in the main cabin. You can take the aisle seat across from Mom. She needs someone to help her with her compression socks." He held the passports out, waiting for me to take them like a good assistant. He expected me to fix this too. He expected me to absorb the disrespect, pay the baggage fees, and smile for the photos because I was Harper Lane, the woman who always made things work. The noise of the airport seemed to fade into a dull buzz. I looked at the hand holding the passports. I looked at the suitcase I bought with my own money. I looked at the woman holding my husband. No, I said. It was not a scream. It was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a desk. The word hung in the cold air between us, sucking the sound out of the space. Graham's smile faltered, just for a second, but he did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. He just let out a sharp, annoyed breath, the kind a parent releases when a toddler refuses to eat their vegetables. He gestured vaguely toward the terminal ceiling, encompassing the entire airport in his dismissive wave. "Come on." "Harper," Graham said, his voice dropping to that condescending register he used when explaining simple concepts to me. "The cabin is over 5,000 square feet. It has 6 bedrooms. It is just logical. Why leave empty rooms when we can maximize the utility? Brielle needed a break, and we are all adults here. It is a reasonable arrangement." I stood there, feeling the absurdity of his words wash over me. He was calling it reasonable. He was framing the act of bringing his mistress on our anniversary reconciliation trip as a logistical efficiency. I had built this stage the Aspen trip, the chalet rental, the first-class tickets to save us. And he had invited the audience to watch me be replaced. Diane stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking aggressively on the hard floor. She adjusted her silk scarf, looking at me with pure disdain. "Oh, for heaven's sake, stop making that face," Diane snapped. "You always do this. You have to ruin every moment with your rigidity. You act like a forensic accountant, not a wife. It is so draining. Harper, look at Brielle. She is light. She knows how to enjoy a moment. You are just so dry. You don't know how to live." She looked around at the growing line of travelers behind us, trying to recruit them into her narrative, painting me as the shrewish buzzkill. Brielle shrank into Graham's coat, playing her part to perfection. She bit her lower lip, widening her eyes. I really didn't mean to cause any trouble. Harper, Graham said you would be cool with it. I can just go home if it's too much for you." But as she lowered her head, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. It was a micro-expression, a fleeting smirk of absolute victory that only I was close enough to see. She knew exactly what she was doing. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. I did not raise my voice. I did not list the years of sacrifice or the late nights I worked to pay for Diane's country club fees. I just looked at Graham and asked the only question that mattered. Who was paying for all this fun? I asked. The question hit Graham like a physical slap. His face went from dismissive to furious in a heartbeat. I had touched the third rail. I had reminded him, publicly, of the power dynamic he desperately tried to ignore. "Is that all you care about?" Graham shouted, his voice cracking with sudden rage. "Money numbers. This is exactly why we are miserable. You are so cold. Harper, you are incapable of real warmth. If I had to do it all over again." "God, I would never choose you again." The words hung there, suspended in the recycled air. "I would never choose you again." It was a knife twist designed to bleed me out right there in front of the Delta check-in desk. But he wasn't done. Graham stepped forward, his face twisted, and he shoved me. It was not a playful nudge. He pushed his hand hard against my shoulder, the force of it catching me off guard. I stumbled backward, my heels slipping on the polished floor. The coffee cup in my hand fell, splashing dark liquid across my boots, and my tote bag slipped off my shoulder, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. The terminal went silent. The background hum of chatter cut off instantly. People froze. A security guard 30 feet away turned his head. I regained my balance and stood there. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt the vibration of the shock, but I boxed it up and shoved it deep into the mental archive where I kept bad quarterly reports. I looked at Graham. He was breathing hard, waiting for my reaction, waiting for the tears or the apology he felt he deserved. Instead, I looked him in the eye, and then I turned my back. I left the tote bag on the floor. I left the passport in his hand. I left the role of the desperate wife trying to salvage a rotting corpse of a marriage. "Where are you going?" Graham yelled after me, his voice laced with panic and bravado. "Don't you walk away from me. You are just being dramatic. You'll be back in 5 minutes." I heard the distinct sound of camera shutters clicking. People were filming. Graham thought I was storming off to the bathroom to compose myself. He thought I was playing a game. I was not playing. I walked with the steady, rhythmic pace of a CEO entering a boardroom to dissolve a partnership. I checked the time on my watch. It was 5:20 in the morning. By 9 o'clock, their world would cease to exist. I was no longer a wife. I was an operator, and I had work to do. I found a secluded bench near the connector to Concourse F, a quiet corner where the floor polishers had not yet reached. The air here was still and smelled faintly of industrial sanitizer. I sat down, the leather of the seat cold against my legs, and pulled a packet of tissues from my pocket. I wiped a smear of coffee from my coat and dabbed at the graze on my shoulder where the strap of my bag had dug in during the shove. It stung, a sharp, grounding pain that helped me focus. I took a deep breath, visualizing a heavy steel drawer in my mind. I took the humiliation, the shock of seeing my husband with another woman, and the stinging memory of his hands on me, and I placed them all inside that drawer. Then I slid it shut and turned the key. Harper the wife was gone. Harper the CEO had just clocked in. My first move was clinical. I walked to the nearest airport medical station. I did not cry or ask for sympathy. I simply asked the medic on duty to document the bruising starting to form on my shoulder and the redness on my wrist. "Ma'am, do you want us to call the police?" the medic asked, holding a tablet. "This looks like, well, it looks like a grab mark." "No," I said, my voice steady. "Just file the report. I need a time-stamped record of a physical altercation occurring at 5:40 in the morning. That is all." Paper trails were stronger than shouting matches. With the documentation secured, I sat back down and unlocked my phone. My fingers moved with the speed of a pianist playing a familiar concerto. I opened my secure messaging app and found Elliot Crane, my attorney. I typed, "Graham got physical in public, mistress and mother present, violence, infidelity, imminent dissipation of assets. Activate the emergency separation protocol immediately. Next." I toggled to the internal company chat. I found our chief financial officer. It was early, but he was an early riser. "Revoke Graham's access to the company servers." I wrote, "Kill his keycard, cut his expense authorization. If he tries to log in, I want the system to flag it as a security breach." Then came the travel app. I stared at the screen. 4 names were listed under the booking reference I had paid for. Graham Pierce, Diane Pierce, Brielle Knox, Harper Lane. We were all linked, a happy little party funded by my bank account. I tapped the button to split the reservation. I isolated my name from theirs. Then, with a single tap of my thumb, I selected the remaining itinerary, the 3 first-class tickets to Aspen, the prepaid chalet transfer, the concierge service, and hit cancel. I did not feel a thrill of vindication. I felt the cold satisfaction of balancing a ledger. 1 button, and 3 people just fell out of the sky. I dialed the priority line for my bank. The agent answered on the first ring. "Ms. Lane, good morning." The voice chirped. "Good morning," I said. "I need to place a temporary freeze on all joint credit cards and the secondary checking account. I have reason to believe the authorized user credentials have been compromised. No transactions over $50 are to be approved without my verbal code." "Of course. We will lock that down immediately." "Thank you." I hung up. The trap was set. They were currently standing in the security line, believing they were about to board a flight that no longer had seats for them, intending to spend money that was no longer accessible. I rebooked myself on a flight leaving 40 minutes later, routing through Denver to avoid any chance of seeing them at the gate. I was still going to Aspen. I had worked too hard for this vacation. I would just be enjoying it without the dead weight before I boarded the tram to the new terminal. I took a single photo. It was just my boarding pass resting on my knee. The name, Harper Lane, clearly visible with the empty seat beside me. I posted it to my story with a caption that was 5 words long. Quiet looks good on me. As I stood up to walk toward the train, my phone began to buzz. It vibrated in my hand, once, twice, 3 times. The screen lit up with the name Graham. Then Diane. Then Graham again. The device shook with their panic, a frantic electronic heartbeat demanding my attention. I did not look at it. I simply slid the phone into my pocket, letting it buzz against my hip. I did not leave immediately. I stood near the glass railing of the mezzanine level, looking down at the priority check-in area like a director watching a play from the balcony. It was a safe distance, far enough to be detached, but close enough to witness the inevitable collapse. Graham approached the counter with that arrogant stride of his, the one that screamed he owned the place. I could practically hear him dismissing the agent's concerns, likely telling her that his wife was just having a moment and would be back shortly to sort out the booking. He handed over his phone, displaying the reservation code that I had just incinerated digitally. The agent, a woman with the patience of a saint, tapped on her keyboard. Then she stopped. She frowned, typed again, and looked up. Even from 50 feet away, I saw Graham's posture stiffen. "I am sorry, sir," the agent said, her voice carrying slightly in the cavernous hall. "This reservation has been canceled by the primary cardholder. The tickets are void." "That is ridiculous," Graham snapped, loud enough for the people in the economy line to turn their heads. "It is a glitch. Just override it. We are flying first class. I cannot override a cancellation." "Sir," the agent replied firmly, "and since you do not have a valid ticket, I must ask you to step out of the priority lane." That was the spark. Diane stepped forward, her face flushing a deep, angry red. She slammed her designer handbag onto the counter. "Do you know who my son is?" Diane shrieked, her voice cracking. "He is a partner at a very important firm. You cannot treat us like common tourists. Call your manager." The crowd around them shifted. They did not see a VIP. They saw a middle-aged man in a suit he could not afford and an older woman throwing a tantrum. A few people pulled out their phones. The court of public opinion was opening its session. Graham, realizing the scene was spiraling, pulled out his wallet. He fumbled for the sleek black credit card, the one attached to our joint account. "Fine," Graham said, his voice tight. "I will just pay for new tickets. Just book them. Now." He inserted the card. He waited. The machine let out a harsh, flat beep. Declined. He tried another card. Declined. He tried the corporate expense card. Declined. For the first time in his life, the invisible safety net I had woven beneath him was gone, and he was free falling. He looked at the card reader in horror, tapping it against the counter as if the machine were the problem. Brielle, who had been posing near the luggage, suddenly dropped her mask of sweetness. She stormed over to Graham, her eyes narrowing. "Graham, what is going on?" Brielle hissed, grabbing his arm. "I already posted a story that we were in the lounge. I look like an idiot standing here. You said this was handled." "It is just a banking error," Graham stammered, sweat visible on his forehead. "Harper must have... She must have frozen the accounts by mistake." By mistake, Brielle laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "She walked away, Graham. She left you, and now we are stuck here. How are we supposed to get the signature for the transfer if we don't get on that plane?" The air around them seemed to freeze. Brielle clamped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. The words were out. "Signature for the transfer." Diane whipped her head around, her eyes widening. "Transfer. What transfer?" You told me the Midtown apartment was going to be put in a trust for the family. It is for the family, Mom, Graham shouted, his voice rising in panic. Brielle and I we needed to secure it first. You were giving it to her? Diane screamed, pointing a manicured finger at Brielle. That little gold digger. That was my retirement plan. I am not a gold digger, Brielle yelled back. I am the only one listening to his problems while you just ask for money. It was grotesque. They were tearing each other apart right there on the polished floor, fighting over scraps of a fortune that they did not realize had already vanished. A woman standing near the velvet rope whispered to her husband, pointing up toward the mezzanine where I stood. Or perhaps she just recognized the name from the charity gala I had sponsored last month. The whispers started to spread. That's Harper Lane's husband. The one who cheated. My phone began to vibrate again. It was Graham. He was calling me, likely to beg, to scream, or to demand I fix the humiliation he had brought upon himself. I looked at the screen, watching his name flash against the picture of us from 5 years ago. I did not feel sad. I felt like I was watching a nature documentary where the predators turn on each other during a drought. I pressed the side button, silencing the call, turning his desperate plea into nothing more than background noise. I turned away from the railing and walked toward the security checkpoint for Concourse B. The show was over. By the time Graham, Diane, and Brielle dragged themselves back to our estate in Buckhead, the sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy with the threat of a thunderstorm. I was not there to see it, but the security logs and the high-definition footage from the gate cameras painted a picture more vivid than memory. Graham walked up to the heavy iron gates, the ones he used to brag about to his golf buddies, and punched in the code. It was our anniversary date. The keypad beeped a harsh, dissonant rejection tone. The light flashed red. Graham punched it again, harder this time, his frustration boiling over into physical aggression against the machine. Open! Open the damn gate! Graham shouted, kicking the bottom of the steel frame. The pedestrian door to the side did not buzz open. Instead, a man stepped out from the guard booth. It was not old Mr. Henderson, who used to wave Graham through with a smile. It was a man I had hired 3 hours ago through a private security firm, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle in a dark rain slicker, holding a thick, waterproof envelope. He did not open the gate. He simply slid the envelope through the bars. Mr. Pierce, the guard said, his voice flat and professional. You are not permitted entry. These are copies of a temporary restraining order and a notice of eviction. You have been served. Eviction, Diane screeched, pushing past Brielle to clutch the cold iron bars. This is my son's house. You cannot keep us out of our own home. I have lived in the guest wing for 6 months. The property is solely titled to Harper Lane. The guard replied, reciting the script my lawyer had prepared. There is no Graham Pierce on the deed. Your residency was at the pleasure of the owner, and that pleasure has been revoked effective immediately. Diane froze. The color drained from her face as the reality of her son's financial impotence hit her. She looked at Graham, her eyes wide with betrayal. You told me you were on the title, Diane whispered, her voice trembling. You told me you paid for the renovation. Graham could not answer. He was staring at the driveway. Under the dry shelter of the service entrance overhang, 4 clear plastic storage bins sat in a neat row. They were stacked with military precision. Inside were Graham's clothes, his toiletries, and Diane's medications and essentials. It was not a chaotic pile of thrown belongings. It was a corporate exit. I had packed them up with the same efficiency I would use to clear out the desk of a fired employee. Brielle walked over to the bins. She looked at the pathetic pile of clothes, then back at the massive, dark house that was locked tight against them. The rain began to fall, cold and biting, soaking into her thin blouse. So, it is all hers, Brielle asked, her voice rising in pitch. The house, the money, the cars. It's complicated. Brielle. Graham snapped, wiping rain from his eyes. We just need to find a hotel for tonight. I will sort this out in the morning. With what card? Graham Brielle screamed, stepping back from him as if he were contagious. Your cards are dead. You lied to me. You are just a broke guy in a nice suit. Don't talk to him like that, Diane yelled, turning her fury on the easiest target. She grabbed Brielle's wrist, her eyes locking onto a gold bracelet glinting in the security light. Wait a minute. That is my mother's tennis bracelet. Graham said it was lost. You gave it to this tramp. He gave it to me. Brielle shrieked, trying to yank her arm back. Let go of me. You are all crazy. Give it back, Diane roared, clawing at the clasp. It was a scene of utter degradation. My husband, his mistress, and his mother were wrestling in the mud outside a mansion they could no longer enter, fighting over a piece of jewelry that was probably worth less than the legal fees Graham was about to incur. Step away from the gate, the guard commanded, his hand moving to his radio. I am contacting the local police to report a disturbance and trespassing. You have 2 minutes to vacate the premises before they arrive. Graham looked up at the camera mounted on the stone pillar. He saw the red recording light blinking. He realized, finally, that he was not in a private argument. He was creating evidence. Stop it, Mom. Stop! Graham pleaded, trying to pry his mother off Brielle. The police are coming. We have to go, while they scrambled to gather their plastic bins in the pouring rain, looking for a taxi that would take cash. I was 30,000 feet above the chaos. I sat in seat 2A, a glass of sparkling water on my tray table. The cabin was quiet. There was no shouting, no rain, and no lies. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the engines. The silence was absolute, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The cabin lights were dimmed, but the glow of my laptop screen illuminated my tray table like a spotlight. While the other passengers in first class slept or watched movies, I was turning seat 2A into a mobile command center. I adjusted my headset and logged into the secure conference line. Noah Briggs, my chief financial officer, and Elliot Crane, my attorney, were already waiting. We are not discussing the divorce yet, I said, cutting off Elliot's initial condolences. The marriage is a loss to be written off later. Right now, the priority is the company. If Graham has been compromised, my business is exposed. Talk to me. Noah, I ran the preliminary scan you asked for, Noah said, his voice tinny through the headphones. And, Harper, I found something disturbing. We have a vendor in the system called Blue Crest Logistics. They have been billing us for consulting and transport expediting for the last 8 months. The invoices are always just under $10,000 to avoid the automatic audit trigger. I don't know a Blue Crest, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard to access the server. Who authorized them? Graham did? Noah replied. He bypassed the procurement department by marking them as an emergency specialized contractor. Total payout so far is close to $120,000. My stomach tightened. It was not a massive sum in the grand scheme of our revenue, but it was the principle of the theft. It was a rat nibbling at the grain. I want a full forensic audit. I commanded, and do not use the internal team. Graham plays golf with half of them. Hire the firm from Chicago. I need the cold. Unemotional truth. Already on it. Elliot chimed in. I just ran a background check on Blue Crest while you were talking. Harper. It is a shell. The business address is not a warehouse or an office park. It is a residential rental unit in a rundown neighborhood in Stone Mountain. Who is the registered agent? I asked. A man named Travis Knox, Elliot said. There was a pause on the line, heavy and pregnant with implication. I cross-referenced him. He has 3 prior judgments for bad debt. He is also Brielle Knox's older brother. I closed my eyes for a second. The picture was coming into focus, and it was uglier than simple lust. Brielle was not just a fun, young distraction Graham had picked up at a bar. She was a funnel. They were siphoning my money. I worked 18-hour days to earn into her family's pockets, and Graham was signing the checks. Check the data logs, I said, my voice dropping an octave. If they are stealing cash, they might be stealing information. I am looking at Graham's outgoing mail server now, Noah said. I could hear his furious typing in the background. He has been forwarding internal documents to a Proton mail address. The subject lines are all innocent, things like fantasy football pics or weekend tea times. But the attachments are not sports rosters. Harper, these are bid specifications for the Midtown Development Project and quarterly financial projections. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the airplane's air conditioning. This was corporate espionage. Graham was not just cheating on me, he was packaging my intellectual property, likely to sell it to a competitor or use it as leverage to start his own firm. He was building a life raft, I said, the realization settling in like concrete. He planned to leave. He was just waiting until he had stolen enough to float. What are your orders? Noah asked. Scorched earth, I said. Lock him out. Revoke every digital certificate he has. Cancel his building access card immediately. I want his company phone remote wiped of sensitive data, but archived for evidence. And freeze any pending transaction above $500 on the operating accounts until I land. Consider it done, Noah said. And Noah. I added, if he calls you, let it go to voicemail. Understood. I ended the call and pulled off the headset. The silence returned, but my mind was screaming. I looked down at my hands resting on the keyboard. My right hand was trembling, just a slight, rhythmic tremor that I could not control. I was not crying. Tears felt useless, a waste of hydration. But the shaking betrayed the sheer physical shock of the betrayal. I had shared my bed with this man. I had supported his career. I had defended him when my friends said he was not ambitious enough. I thought I was nurturing a partner. I looked out the window at the darkness of the clouds below. I realized now that I had not been nurturing a partner. I had been feeding a parasite. And for the first time in 10 years, I was going to stop the feeding. The shaking in my hand stopped as I clenched it into a fist. The parasite was about to starve. The relief of the flight did not last long. The moment I connected to the secure Wi-Fi in the private lounge during my layover, my phone exploded with a priority call from Elliot. His voice was tight, lacking its usual polished assurance. Harper, we have a problem, Elliot said, skipping the pleasantries. Do you remember the arthroscopic knee surgery you had 2 years ago? The one where you were under anesthesia for 4 hours? Yes, I replied, setting my laptop down on the heavy oak table. What about it? You signed a durable power of attorney giving Graham authority to act on your behalf if there were complications, Elliot explained, the sound of rustling papers audible in the background. We never formally revoked it. Technically, he still holds the legal right to sign documents in your name. My blood ran cold. It was a loophole the size of a canyon. Graham was not just an authorized user on a credit card, on paper. He was me. Kill it. I ordered, my voice hard. File an emergency revocation. Right now. I am drafting the motion, Elliot said. But the courts are closed until tomorrow morning. If he uses that document before the judge stamps my request, we are in dangerous territory. Graham was already moving. My phone began to ping with messages from mutual friends and business partners. They were screenshots of texts Graham had sent them. He was painting a masterpiece of gaslighting. Harper is having a breakdown. I think the stress of the company finally snapped her mind. She left me at the airport and is acting manic. I am just trying to protect her assets from herself. He was trying to invalidate my sanity so that if I fired him, it would look like the erratic action of a mentally unstable woman. Then came a message from a number I did not have saved, but the tone was unmistakable. It was Diane. Harper, please, I am an old woman. You cannot leave me on the street. Graham is out of his mind. If you rent me a small apartment, just a studio, I will testify. I will tell the judge whatever you want. I saw him hit you. I stared at the screen. She was selling out her own son for the price of a month's rent. I did not reply. I simply took a screenshot and forwarded it to Elliot with a note witness for the prosecution secured. Meanwhile, the court of public opinion was in session. Noah sent me a link to a video on social media. It was Brielle. She was sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room, her makeup carefully smeared to look like she had been crying for hours. I never wanted to be involved in this. Brielle sobbed into the camera, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. I am just a normal girl who fell in love. And now this powerful female billionaire is using her money to crush me. She stranded us. She is a bully. I scrolled down to the comments. I expected hate. Instead, I saw the internet doing what it did best. Someone had uploaded the video from the airport, the one where Brielle smirked while I was being shoved. The top comment read, "That is not a victim. That is a side piece who got caught. Team Harper." I put the phone down. They were flailing. But then, Noah's face popped up on my laptop screen, and he looked pale. "Harper, stop looking at the social media noise," Noah said, his voice urgent. "They are distractions. I found the real play. There is a scheduled wire transfer in the pending queue. It is set to execute automatically at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." How much, I asked. $2.5 million, Noah said. "It is labeled as a property acquisition for the North Creek expansion. Graham approved it yesterday using his executive override." "We are not expanding in North Creek," I said, leaning forward. "Who is the seller A holding company called Obsidian Real Estate?" Noah replied. I dug into their filing. The listed manager is a generic lawyer, but the digital signature on the incorporation papers? Harper. The metadata matches Graham's personal laptop. He is buying a worthless piece of land from himself. I sat back, the breath leaving my lungs. This was it. This was the exit strategy. He knew the marriage was dying, so he had set up a $2.5 million parachute. He planned to let the money wire out tomorrow morning, and by the time I noticed the missing funds, he would be in a country with non-extradition treaties. "Can we stop it?" I asked. "The bank's automated clearinghouse system is already locked for the night," Noah said, sounding defeated. "Since it was approved by an authorized officer, him, it will go through the second the market opens. Unless we get a court injunction physically delivered to the bank's fraud department before 8 in the morning. The money is gone." I looked at the time. It was 11 at night. I had 9 hours to stop a robbery that was happening in slow motion. "Get the paperwork ready." "Noah," I said, standing up and grabbing my coat. "I am not sleeping tonight. I spent the night in a hotel room near the airport, but I never touched the bed. I paced the floor, fielding calls from Elliot, reviewing affidavits, and watching the city lights of Denver flicker below me. I was not grieving the man I had lost. I was grieving the time I had wasted trusting him. I watched the digital clock on the nightstand flick from 3:59 to 4 in the morning. I was running a race against my own husband, and the finish line was a bank vault opening at 8 o'clock. If I was 1 minute late, he won, and I was done losing. The morning sun had not yet crested over the Denver skyline, but the war inside my hotel suite was already reaching its fever pitch. It was 6:45 in the morning. We had exactly 75 minutes before the banking servers in New York opened for the day and processed the automated wire transfer. If that money left my account, it would disappear into a labyrinth of offshore shells before I could even finish my coffee. "We need to prove immediate and irreparable harm," Elliot said, his voice crackling through the speakerphone. He was drafting the affidavit for the emergency injunction while simultaneously waking up a judge he knew from law school. "If we just argue it is a bad business deal, the court will not intervene. We have to prove it is fraud." "It is fraud." "Elliot," I said, pacing the length of the room, He is buying a warehouse that has been condemned for 3 years for $2.5 million. The market value is maybe $200,000. I need a link. Harper, Noah interrupted from the other line. I need to prove Graham is on the other side of that transaction. Right now. Obsidian Real Estate looks like a ghost. The ownership is buried under 3 layers of LLCs in Delaware. I stared at the documents Noah had uploaded to our shared drive. Graham was sloppy, but he was not stupid. He had hidden his name well, but arrogance always leaves a fingerprint. I opened the metadata of the intent to sell document that Obsidian Real Estate had sent to my company. Check the author, I said, my eyes narrowing. Look at the document properties on the PDF from the seller. There was a silence on the line, followed by the frantic clicking of Noah's keyboard. Got him, Noah whispered, the thrill of the hunt bleeding into his voice. The document was created on a licensed copy of Microsoft Word registered to Graham Pierce Personal. And, oh, this is beautiful. He forgot to scrub the edit history. There is a draft version here where he refers to the payout account as My Swiss Stash. He literally wrote his own exit plan in the margins. That is our smoking gun, Elliot said, his tone shifting from worried to predatory. I am sending this to the judge. I will have the injunction signed in 10 minutes. Noah, get the bank's fraud department on the line. Tell them a court order is incoming and to flag the transaction as criminal activity. At 7:52 in the morning, 8 minutes before the deadline, the confirmation came through. The bank had locked the transfer. The $2.5 million remained safe in my operating account. The trap had snapped shut. I signed the formal cancellation notice and the termination of employment letter digitally, sending copies to the bank, the escrow agent, and Graham's personal email. I had not just fired him, I had cut off his oxygen. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. It was not Graham's usual number. It was a prepaid burner phone. I answered, putting it on speaker so Elliot and Noah could witness the fallout. Harper, please. You have to unblock the transfer. Graham's voice was unrecognizable. It was high, breathless, and laced with sheer terror. You don't understand what you have done. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice steady. You tried to embezzle $2.5 million. I stopped you. No. Listen to me, Graham screamed, and I could hear him hyperventilating. I borrowed money to set up the shell company. I borrowed from bad people. Harper, I promised them their principal back plus interest by noon today. If that wire doesn't hit... God, they are going to come for me. They said they would break my legs. Or worse. So that was the twist. He was not just stealing from me. He was gambling with the loan sharks, using my money as his guaranteed payout. He had dug a grave, assuming I would be the one to fall into it. That sounds like a liquidity problem. Graham, I said. Harper, please, he sobbed, the sound wet and pathetic. I am your husband. Do not let them hurt me. Just release the funds. I will sign anything you want later. Just save me. I looked out the window. The city below was waking up. Cars were moving on the highway. People were going to work, and the world was continuing its indifferent rotation. You signed that debt, I said, delivering the verdict. I am not your bank anymore. I ended the call. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioner. Graham was out there somewhere, alone, broke, and hunted by the very greed he had cultivated. Harper, Elliot said softly, we have enough for a criminal indictment. Grand larceny, corporate espionage, fraud. Do you want me to call the district attorney? Not yet, I said, turning away from the window. A public trial drags my company's name through the mud. It scares the investors. We handle this quietly. We let the streets handle Graham, and we let the lawyers handle the cleanup. Seal the file. Elliot, we are done here. The emergency hearing took place in a windowless courtroom that smelled of floor polish and anxiety. It was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the unspoken realization that lives were about to be dismantled. I sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly still, my hands folded over a thick file of evidence. Across the aisle, the united front of the Pierce family had completely disintegrated. Graham sat slumped in his chair, his suit rumpled and his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit that did not exist. Diane and Brielle were no longer sitting near him. They had hired separate counsel, and the physical distance between their chairs told the whole story. The ship was sinking, and the rats were scrambling over each other to find high ground. Diane was the first to take the stand, and she wasted no time in executing a perfect betrayal. She dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the frail, manipulated matriarch. "Your Honor, I am just an old woman," Diane sobbed, her voice trembling with a performance worthy of an award. "I had no idea where the money came from. Graham told me. He told me Harper wanted us to have the house. He said he was handling the finances because Harper was too busy. I was just listening to my son. I never meant to hurt anyone." Graham stared at his mother, his jaw dropping. "She had accepted my money, lived in my house, and insulted me for years, but the moment the checkbook closed, she threw her own son to the wolves to save her reputation. Then it was Brielle's turn. She had abandoned the arrogant smirk she wore at the airport. Now, she was dressed in a modest cardigan, trying to look like a naive girl caught in a bad romance. He lied to me," Brielle cried, looking pleadingly at the judge. "Graham told me they were legally separated. He said the divorce was just a formality waiting on paperwork. I would never have dated a married man. I am a victim here too." Elliot stood up slowly, adjusting his tie. He held up a single piece of paper. "Ms. Knox," Elliot said, his voice smooth and deadly. "If you believed they were separated, can you explain this text message sent from your phone to Mr. Pierce on the night of their 10th anniversary? It reads, 'I hope you are not having too much fun with the wife tonight. Remember who is waiting for you.' That was sent while my client and Mr. Pierce were at a romantic dinner." Brielle went pale. She stammered, looking for an excuse, but found none. The judge made a note, his face grim. Graham, sensing the walls closing in, decided to play his last card. He stood up, interrupting his own lawyer, and pulled a crumpled document from his briefcase. He waved it in the air like a shield. "This is all irrelevant," Graham shouted, his voice cracking. "I have a durable power of attorney. Look, Harper signed it 2 years ago. It gives me the legal right to manage her assets and sign documents in her name. The transfer to the real estate company was legal because I am her agent. I had permission." He actually smiled, a weak, desperate twitch of his lips, thinking he had found the magic loophole. Elliot did not even blink. He walked over to the bench. "Your Honor," Elliot said, "a power of attorney acts as a fiduciary instrument. It grants authority to act in the principal's best interest. It is not a license for self-dealing. Mr. Pierce used this power to attempt to transfer $2.5 million into a shell company controlled by the brother of his mistress. That is not management. That is embezzlement and a breach of fiduciary duty. We also have the forensic audit," Noah Briggs added, stepping forward to hand a thick binder to the bailiff. The defendant did not just try to steal cash. He has been funneling proprietary bid data to competitors in exchange for kickbacks. The total estimated damage to North Pine Ventures is over $4 million in lost contracts. The room went silent. Graham sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face. But we were not done. "One last thing. Your Honor," Elliot said, "we would like to enter Exhibit C into the record. This is an audio file recovered from the home security system in the master bedroom, dated 3 days before the trip. I watched Graham. He froze. He knew what was on that tape." The clerk pressed play. Graham's voice filled the courtroom, clear and arrogant. "Don't worry about the price. Brielle, I will get Harper to sign the authorization tonight. She never reads anything when she is tired. I will slip it in with the insurance forms. Once she signs, we move the cash, and by the time she wakes up, we will be in Aspen celebrating. Then Brielle's voice, giggling. You are so bad. I love it. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. The judge slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked at Graham not as a husband in a divorce case, but as a criminal defendant. This court has heard enough, the judge said, his tone icy. Mr. Pierce, the evidence presented suggests a coordinated conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft. I am freezing all remaining assets immediately. Furthermore, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing and all exhibits to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Graham turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying realization. He had thought my silence at the airport was shock. He had thought my silence on the phone was weakness. Now, as he looked at the stenographer typing out the record of his destruction, he finally understood. My silence had not been a retreat. It had been the sound of me writing his sentence. The prosecutor was not done. Just when the room seemed to have reached its saturation point for scandal, he signaled to the bailiff to display one final document on the courtroom monitors. It was a credit guarantee application for a massive business loan, forcing the liability of a high-risk venture squarely onto my personal assets. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence, we have uncovered that Mr. Pierce did not just misappropriate funds. He executed a loan application 3 weeks ago using a digital forgery of Mrs. Lane's signature. If this loan had defaulted, Mrs. Lane would have been liable for over $5 million in debt, likely forcing her into personal bankruptcy while Mr. Pierce walked away with the principal. Graham sank lower in his chair, looking small and withered. Elliot stood up immediately to drive the final nail into the coffin. He held up a tablet displaying a forensic timeline. We have the metadata, Your Honor, Elliot said calmly. We have the exact time the signature file was created on Mr. Pierce's laptop. We also have an email thread between Mr. Pierce and an anonymous account which we have traced to Ms. Knox's brother discussing how to frame my client for insurance fraud if the loan scheme fell apart. The courtroom erupted. Brielle stood up, knocking her chair over. I didn't know about the loan. Brielle screamed, her voice shrill with panic. He told me he was investing his own money. I want to recant my statement. I am not going to jail for him, Diane, sensing that the family ship had fully capsized, let out a dramatic gasp and slumped sideways in her chair, feigning a faint. No one moved to help her. Even the bailiff just looked at her with tired resignation. Graham looked at his mother, then at his mistress, and finally realized he was utterly alone. He slid out of his chair and fell to his knees right there on the courtroom floor. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, his arrogance replaced by a pathetic, primal fear. Harper, please, Graham choked out, reaching a hand toward me but stopping short of touching the table. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we can work this out. If you speak for me, they will go easy. Please, I am your husband. The entire room held its breath. The stenographer stopped typing. Everyone waited to see if the wife would crack, if the years of marriage would soften the blow. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the fabric of my sleeve, adjusting my cuff with deliberate precision. It was a small movement, but it felt like I was drawing the final border around my life. I looked down at the man who had shoved me in an airport terminal just 48 hours ago. I did not yell. I did not rage. Graham, I said, my voice clear enough to reach the back of the room. You told me at the gate that you would never choose me again. He flinched as his own words came back to haunt him. You were right, I continued, my tone flat and final. You chose greed. I only chose to leave. I turned back to the judge. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. The restraining order remains in full effect. The judge ruled, his voice leaving no room for argument. I am remanding Mr. Pierce into custody pending the criminal investigation. Bail is denied due to flight risk. Ms. Knox and Mrs. Diane Pierce are ordered to surrender their passports and cooperate with the prosecution. The bailiffs moved in. As they pulled Graham to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back, I sat down and signed the divorce settlement Elliot placed in front of me. My hand did not shake. There were no tears on the paper, just ink. I walked out of the courthouse 10 minutes later. The press was waiting at the bottom of the steps, their cameras flashing like lightning in the gray afternoon. They shouted questions. Harper, how do you feel? Did you know about the fraud? Is the company safe? I did not answer. I put on my sunglasses and walked through the crowd to my waiting car. My company had already issued a press release reassuring our investors that the internal control systems had worked perfectly. The stock was actually up 2%. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the chaos behind, I closed my eyes and thought back to that moment in the terminal. I saw myself sitting on the bench, wiping coffee off my boot, deciding not to scream, deciding not to fight in the mud. He had tried to destroy me with noise and humiliation, but I had saved myself with silence. And looking back at the wreckage of his life disappearing in the rearview mirror, I knew one thing for certain. Quiet looked very good on me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I love reading your thoughts and seeing how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.